Airport manager denies boarding to a late passenger with smug pride, unaware it's Big Shaq, the airport's new CEO. In seconds, arrogance collides with authority. What began as a power trip becomes a career-ending disaster. Because this time, the rules answer to Big Shaq. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The storm outside raged against the airport windows. Sheets of rain hammering down as if the sky itself was in turmoil. Inside the terminal, the atmosphere wasn't much different. Delayed flights, frustrated passengers, the steady hum of announcements filling the air. A normal chaotic day at the airport. Through the crowd, a towering figure moved with urgency. His steps were long and determined, dodging rolling suitcases and half-distracted travelers. A hood covered most of his face, but the sheer size of him made people glance twice. He wasn't just another passenger. He had somewhere to be, and he was running out of time. The clock near gate 47 flashed 8:59 p.m., 1 minute before the final boarding call. He reached the counter just as the gate agent reached for the mic. The agent, a young woman named Vanessa, paused, eyes flicking up at the man in front of her. Her breath hitched slightly. She knew that face. "Wait," he said, his voice deep but controlled. The man pulled back his hood slightly. His face was partially visible now, enough for recognition to creep into Vanessa's features. "Sir," she started cautiously, her hands hesitating over the keyboard. "Boarding just closed." "Shaquille O'Neal," she breathed under her breath. She knew who he was. Probably most of the people standing around did too. But airport protocol was strict. 1 minute late meant no exceptions. Vanessa hesitated, torn. She wasn't the one who made the final calls. "Ma'am, I just need to get on that flight," Shaq said, his voice still calm, but there was a weight to it. This wasn't just a luxury flight for him. He had a reason for needing to be on that plane. Unfortunately, the man who did was already approaching. Donovan Kane, the airport's operations manager. A man who prided himself on absolute control. He had built a reputation for being a stickler for the rules. The type who enjoyed saying no just to remind people who had the power. Donovan Kane stood tall, his arms crossed, watching the giant of a man disappear into the terminal. His lips curled slightly in satisfaction. Another late passenger put in his place. Another reminder that he was in charge. To Donovan, this was just another day of enforcing the rules. Rules that kept people like him at the top, and people like that beneath them. It had nothing to do with who the traveler was. It was about the principle. He had built his reputation on being unyielding. A man who never bent. The moment passed, and he turned back to Vanessa, who was still staring at the empty space where the man had been moments ago. "Close out the manifest," Donovan instructed, flipping open his clipboard. "And next time, don't waste my time with people who think they're above the system." Vanessa's fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant. She wasn't the only one. A few other employees nearby exchanged nervous glances, whispering to each other. "Did you see who that was?" one of the baggage handlers murmured. "Yeah," another muttered back. And Donovan just kicked him off his flight. Donovan's ears caught the hushed tones, but he didn't bother turning around. Let them whisper. Passengers complained all the time. They got upset when they didn't get their way. It wasn't his job to care. Still, the murmurs didn't stop. He glanced back toward Vanessa, who was typing slower than usual, her face slightly pale. "Problem?" Donovan asked, raising an eyebrow. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, sir." He huffed. "Then stop wasting time." With that, he pivoted on his heel and strode back toward his office, his mind already shifting to the next task. Inside the airport's security room, a bank of monitors flickered with live footage from every corner of the terminal. TSA agents, security personnel, and flight coordinators worked in their usual rhythm, except for one officer, who kept rewinding the same clip. The footage from gate. The angle wasn't the best, but it captured everything. The brief exchange, the way the tall man pulled back his hood, the moment Vanessa recognized him. The officer squinted at the screen. Something about the man felt familiar. He leaned forward, dragging the cursor to zoom in on the moment the man turned slightly, his face caught in the reflection of the check-in counter. His eyes widened. "No way." His hand shot to the radio clipped to his vest. Dispatch?" His voice held a strange mixture of excitement and panic. "You're gonna want to take a look at this security feed. I think," he hesitated, blinking at the screen again. I think we just denied boarding to Shaquille O'Neal. Silence crackled through the line for half a second. Then, say again? The officer swallowed. Shaquille O'Neal. The Shaquille O'Neal. A longer pause. Then a different voice cut in, this one sharper. Who denied him? The officer checked the badge on the security footage timestamp. Looks like Donovan Kane. A low whistle came through the radio. Someone murmured in the background. Oh, he's done for. Donovan sat in his office, sipping his coffee, blissfully unaware of the slow-moving storm about to rip through his world. His computer screen displayed a stack of reports, flight delay logs, and maintenance schedules. A normal night. But outside his office, the air was shifting. Employees moved with anxious energy, whispering behind their hands, checking their phones more often than usual. Some were actively avoiding Donovan's door, as if standing too close might get them caught up in whatever was coming. Then his desk phone rang. Kane, he answered, his voice clipped. Donovan. The voice on the other end was laced with tension. It belonged to Richard Evans, the airport's deputy director, not a man who called unless there was a problem. Donovan leaned back, tapping his fingers on the desk. What's up? A pause. Then, did you deny Shaquille O'Neal a flight tonight? Donovan blinked, the question so out of left field that it took him a second to process. What? He let out a short laugh. Shaquille O'Neal? No. You did, Richard said, his voice tight. We just pulled security footage. He was the late passenger at gate 4. The amusement drained from Donovan's face. He sat up straighter.
That was him?
He shook his head, scoffing. That doesn't change anything. He was late. The rules don't apply to billionaires, Donovan, Richard snapped, especially not ones with the kind of influence Shaq has. Do you have any idea what's happening online right now? A sharp knock sounded at Donovan's door. He barely had time to react before it swung open, and one of the PR executives rushed in, her face flushed. Donovan, she gasped. It's everywhere. The video of you denying Shaq is going viral. It's got over 2 million views in the last hour. Donovan felt a cold tightness in his chest. What video? He asked, already dreading the answer. She turned her phone around. On the screen, a paused video showed him standing with his arms crossed, smug, dismissive, and right in front of him, the towering frame of Shaquille O'Neal. Even before he pressed play, Donovan already knew what was coming, and for the first time a sliver of fear crept into his spine. The airport's fluorescent lights buzzed softly as hundreds of passengers moved through the terminal, unaware that something monumental had just happened at gate 47. But one teenager, sitting on the cold leather seats near the boarding area, had captured everything. His name was Jordan Knox, a 17-year-old with a knack for filming things at the right moment. His phone, still warm in his hands, had been recording the entire confrontation from the second Shaquille O'Neal pulled down his hood to the smug smirk on Donovan Kane's face as he denied him boarding. Jordan's hands shook slightly as he stopped the recording. He knew he had something big. This is gonna blow up, he muttered, already opening his Twitter app. With quick, practiced fingers, he typed out a caption. Breaking, racist airport manager denies boarding to NBA legend Shaq. This dude really told him rules are rules, like he's just some random guy. Wow. Watch this. He attached the video, hit post, and watched the internet take over. In less than 10 minutes, the first 100 retweets rolled in. 15 minutes later, 5,000 likes. By the time Jordan's phone buzzed with the first celebrity retweet, his video was already past 500,000 views. And then, boom, viral. At first, the airport's PR team didn't notice. They were handling baggage complaints, flight delays, and the usual corporate nonsense. But when their office phones started ringing non-stop, they knew something was off. Samantha Reed, the head of public relations, had just sat down with her coffee when her assistant rushed in, eyes wide, phone shaking in her hands. Ma'am, we have a problem. Samantha sighed, setting her mug down. Another lost luggage situation? The assistant gulped. No. Twitter. Samantha frowned and took the phone. Her heart nearly stopped. Right there, at the top of trending topics, fire Donovan Kane, justice for Shaq, airport scandal. She clicked the first post she saw. It was the video. Crystal clear. Shaquille O'Neal, standing calm but frustrated. Donovan Kane, standing defiant and dismissive. The moment Shaq silently walked away while Donovan smirked. 22. Oh, my God. Samantha whispered. Meanwhile, Donovan Kane sat in his office, blissfully unaware that his career was burning down around him, until his desk phone wouldn't stop ringing. The first call was from his boss, Richard Evans. He ignored it. The second call was from an unknown number. Probably another complaint. He ignored that too. Then came the third call. This time from his wife. Confused, he finally answered. Hey, what's up? He said casually, leaning back in his chair. The voice on the other end was not casual. Donovan, what the hell did you do? He sat up straight, brow furrowing. What? Check your email. Check Twitter. Check anything. She snapped. You're everywhere. Frowning, Donovan opened his laptop and clicked on Twitter. The first thing he saw was his own face, frozen mid-smirk, plastered across a viral post. He clicked play. The audio kicked in, Shaq's measured voice, his own snide response. The way Shaq held back his frustration while Donovan stood there like a gatekeeper of power. The video cut to black. Then, the real damage appeared. The comment. Who is this Donovan clown? He just denied Shaq? Oh, he's done. That's a one-way ticket to unemployment. Man had the audacity to flex his little airport manager badge at a billionaire. It's the arrogance for me. Shaq didn't even have to raise his voice. That's how you know the power difference was real. Donovan's chest tightened as the realization sank in.
This wasn't just a video. This was a career-ending mistake.
A sharp knock on his office door made him jump. It swung open before he could respond. Samantha Reed stormed in, her phone gripped in her fist, her face burning red. Do you have any idea what you've done? She hissed. Donovan opened his mouth, but she slammed her phone down on his desk. The screen was filled with news headlines. Breaking: NBA legend Shaq denied boarding in shocking airport incident. Airport manager refuses to let Shaq board. Twitter demands justice. Shaq humiliated at airport. Racial profiling allegations soreface. Donovan felt his stomach plummet. This is a PR nightmare. Samantha seethed. Sponsors are calling. Corporate wants answers. The airport board is in a meltdown. And guess what? She leaned forward, her voice deadly calm. You're the face of this disaster. Donovan's throat went dry. They can't fire me, he said, forcing confidence into his tone. I followed protocol. The flight was closed. He was late. Samantha let out a bitter laugh. You really think this is about policy? She snatched up her phone again and pulled up another tweet. It was from Shaquille O'Neal himself. I don't ask for special treatment. I just ask for fairness. Respect goes both ways. 3.1 million likes. Donovan's skin went cold. Samantha shook her head. You don't get it, do you? You didn't just deny boarding to a late passenger. You denied Shaquille O'Neal, one of the most loved public figures on the planet. A man who built his career on being humble, generous, and kind. She jabbed her finger at his chest. And you just became America's newest villain. For the first time, fear truly settled in Donovan's bones. This wasn't just a bad day at work. This was the beginning of his downfall. The tension in the conference room was thick enough to choke on. The long oak table, usually a space for mundane operational meetings, now felt like an execution chamber. The entire airport management team had been summoned: directors, supervisors, department heads, all seated in nervous silence. Their eyes flicked between each other, but no one dared to whisper. Something was wrong. Donovan Kane sat near the middle, arms crossed, foot tapping restlessly under the table. His palms were damp, but he forced himself to look unfazed. He had handled PR disasters before. This is just a slap on the wrist, he told himself. They'll give me some corporate nonsense about being more careful with high-profile passengers and then move on. But as the minutes ticked by, his confidence wavered. The airport board of directors walked in, looking visibly shaken. These were men and women who had seen everything, from financial crashes to scandalous lawsuits. Yet today they looked like soldiers marching to their own funeral. Donovan's stomach tightened. Then Richard Evans, the head of operations, stepped forward and cleared his throat. His usual commanding voice wavered slightly. Thank you all for coming on short notice, he began, scanning the room. As you may have heard, last night an unfortunate incident took place involving one of our staff and a high-profile individual. A murmur ran through the room. Everyone knew what he meant. Donovan forced a smirk, pretending not to feel the heat creeping up his neck. Unfortunate incident was a nice way of saying, Donovan, you really screwed up. Richard continued. In light of recent events, The board has been in discussions about the direction of this airport, our leadership, and the values we want to uphold. He paused, shifting uncomfortably. And with that, Richard said, his voice growing quieter, I'd like to introduce you to our new CEO. Donovan's smirk vanished. Richard turned toward the door. The heavy wooden panel swung open, and in walked Shaquille O'Neal. The room fell into stunned silence. Shaq, dressed in an impeccable black suit, moved with the same effortless confidence he always carried. No anger, no smugness, just quiet authority. His presence alone sucked the oxygen from the room. Donovan couldn't breathe. Richard turned back to the staff, his throat dry. Everyone, meet the new chief executive officer of this airport, Mr. Shaquille O'Neal. A collective gasp rippled through the conference room. The head of security nearly dropped his pen. The HR director swallowed hard. Someone near the back muttered, no. Freaking. What? Donovan? He couldn't move. Couldn't speak. Couldn't process the words. This had to be a joke. Shaquille O'Neal, the man he had smugly dismissed just hours ago, was his boss. His actual boss? A cold sweat trickled down his spine. Shaq let the moment settle, letting them all absorb the weight of it. Then finally he spoke. I want to start by saying, Shaq began, his deep voice filling the silent room. I'm not here for revenge. His eyes didn't leave Donovan. Donovan felt like a man standing trial. I'm here because I believe in leadership. Shaq continued. In respect, in treating people fairly, whether they're a CEO, an employee, or a passenger just trying to catch a flight. The words cut deep. Last night, Shaq said, clasping his hands together, I had an experience that reminded me why change is necessary. Donovan's chest tightened. He wanted to vanish into his chair. Shaq took a slow step forward. His presence, his sheer size, made Donovan feel smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. Some of you might be wondering how I ended up here, Shaq said. The truth is, I've been part of the aviation industry for a while now. I've invested in multiple airports, airlines, and transportation companies. A few people nodded slowly, realization dawning. But more importantly, Shaq continued, his voice dropping slightly, I've spent my life treating people with dignity, no matter where I go. Donovan's pulse pounded. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Shaq turned to Richard. Would you mind pulling up last night's security footage? Donovan stiffened. Richard hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding to the IT director. Within moments, the footage appeared on the large projector screen. There it was, Donovan, standing smugly with his arms crossed. Shaq, calm and patient, asking for an exception. Donovan smirking as he denied him. Then the moment where Shaq simply walked away. The room was dead silent. A pit formed in Donovan's stomach. This, Shaq said, gesturing toward the screen, is what's wrong with leadership today. He turned to face Donovan fully now. I wasn't asking for special treatment, Shaq said, his voice even. I was asking for fairness. The tension was unbearable. Donovan's throat felt like sandpaper. Shaq let the words sink in, before stepping back. He took a slow breath, then looked at the rest of the staff. Let me be clear, he said. I don't run airports like a business. I run them like a community. And a community doesn't work when people in power forget who they serve. The message wasn't just for Donovan. It was for everyone in the room. Donovan gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Shaq exhaled, then turned back to Richard. That's all I have to say for now. Let's get to work. With that, he took his seat at the head of the table, right where Donovan used to sit. And just like that, his world had changed forever. Donovan could feel their stares, could sense the quiet satisfaction radiating from some of them. They knew. They had always known. For years, Donovan had wielded his authority like a weapon, crushing complaints under piles of bureaucracy, silencing dissent with thinly veiled threats, and enforcing policies only when they suited him. But now, the tables had turned. And the worst part? Shaq wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. He simply sat there, his towering presence alone enough to suffocate Donovan in his own seat. His hands were folded on the table, his expression unreadable. Finally, Shaq spoke. I don't believe in revenge, he said, his voice deep but steady. I believe in accountability. The words sliced through the silence. Donovan swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. I followed protocol, he said quickly, trying to steady his voice. The flight was closed. I was just doing my job. Shaq raised a hand, not aggressively, not to silence him, just a small, simple gesture. and somehow it worked. Donovan clamped his mouth shut. Shaq leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table. "Tell me something, Donovan," he said, his voice calm. "If I wasn't Shaquille O'Neal, if I wasn't a billionaire, would you have treated me any differently?" Donovan opened his mouth, then shut it again. Shaq didn't blink.
Would you?
The silence stretched long enough to make Donovan shift in his chair. "Rules are rules," Donovan muttered, gripping the edge of the table. Shaq nodded slowly, considering his words. "Rules," he repeated. "Let me ask you something else then. How many times have you bent those rules for someone you deemed important?" A ripple went through the staff. Donovan's jaw tightened. He could feel the room closing in on him. Shaq looked around the table now, his eyes scanning the familiar faces of employees who had worked under Donovan for years. "How many of you," Shaq asked, "have seen exceptions made for first-class passengers?" The room stayed quiet, but the answer was clear in their faces. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Some dropped their gazes to the table. Others, braver, looked directly at Donovan. Shaq let out a small breath. "Thought so." Donovan clenched his fists beneath the table. Shaq straightened in his chair, his gaze never wavering. "I could have walked in here today and fired you on the spot," he said. "But I don't operate like that. I don't believe in making people suffer just because I can." For a split second, Donovan felt the tiniest sliver of relief. Then Shaq continued, "But I do believe in consequences." And just like that, the relief was gone. Shaq reached for a folder in front of him, flipping it open with deliberate slowness. He slid a single document across the table. "Read it." Donovan hesitated before snatching up the paper. His eyes scanned the words, his breath catching in his throat. A formal review of his conduct, multiple complaints, employee testimonies, a record of denied accommodations, targeted enforcements of policies, and patterns of discrimination. His fingers tightened around the edges of the paper. "We pulled reports from the last 5 years," Shaq said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Found a pattern, found people willing to talk." Donovan's pulse thundered in his ears. "This isn't just about me," Shaq continued, his voice even. "This is about every person you mistreated, because you thought they had no power. Every person you dismissed, embarrassed, or belittled, just because you could." A heavy silence followed. The staff exchanged looks, some shocked, some expectant. They had waited for this moment. For the first time, Donovan realized that he was alone. No one was defending him. No one even looked surprised. Shaq leaned forward slightly. "You have 2 options, Donovan." Donovan lifted his head, forcing himself to meet Shaq's eyes. "You can resign quietly and save what's left of your reputation," Shaq said. "Or you can stay, and we go public with everything." Donovan felt the floor disappear beneath him. A public scandal meant permanent damage. If he walked away now, maybe, just maybe, he could spin it. Find another job. Save face. But if he fought, the truth would ruin him. The entire room waited. The walls felt smaller. The air felt thinner. Donovan's hands shook as he reached for a pen. And with a single stroke, his career was over. The HR department was rarely a place of urgency. It was the quiet corner of the airport's administrative wing, where employee files sat untouched for years, buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy. But today, it was the epicenter of an earthquake. A long, polished conference table was now covered in files. Not just any files. Donovan Kane's personnel records. The door swung open, and Samantha Reed, the head of PR, stormed in, her phone still buzzing with news alerts. She tossed it onto the table, rubbing her temples. "Tell me we have something," she muttered, looking at the HR director, Henry Wallace. Henry, a thin man with years of experience navigating corporate scandals, pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose and sighed. "We have more than something," he said, flipping open a thick, overstuffed file labeled D. Kane. The first page alone was damning. Complaints. Dozens of them. Some dated back nearly a decade. Samantha leaned in, skimming the documents, her expression shifting from frustration to disbelief. Excessive force with TSA policy, unjustified flight rejections, documented racial bias complaints, she murmured, flipping through. Why the hell was this guy still employed? Henry hesitated, then turned to a sealed envelope tucked inside the file. He pulled it out and slid it across the table. "This," he said, "is why." Samantha picked it up, her pulse quickening. She tore it open and pulled out a letter stamped with the official airport board's insignia. The letter was short. Too short. "Donovan Kane is to remain in his current position, No disciplinary action will be taken at this time. No reason. No explanation. Just a direct order. Samantha's stomach turned. So someone was protecting him. Henry nodded. Not just someone. Someone high up. A tense silence settled between them. Then, a knock at the door. A woman stepped in, a former HR assistant, now a whistleblower. Her name was Lisa Thompson, and her expression was grim. I have something you need to hear, Lisa said, gripping the strap of her purse tightly. Samantha gestured to a seat. Go ahead. Lisa took a shaky breath. I worked in HR under the last director, she began. I remember when the first complaints about Donovan started coming in. She exhaled sharply. We tried to process them, but every single time they got buried. Buried? Henry asked, frowning. Lisa nodded. Every complaint flagged as serious got rerouted to the board, and every time, they shut it down. Samantha's blood ran cold. Lisa swallowed hard. The truth is, Donovan Kane should have been fired years ago. But someone on the board made sure that never happened. Samantha exchanged a look with Henry. They were no longer just dealing with a rogue employee. They were dealing with a system built to protect him. And the bigger question now was, who was pulling the strings? The more Shaquille O'Neal dug, the deeper the rot went. At first it had seemed like just one bad employee. Donovan Kane, a man who had built his career on unchecked arrogance, wielding his authority like a shield. But as Shaq sifted through reports, leaked emails, and buried complaints, he realized something chilling. Donovan hadn't been acting alone. There was a system in place. A system that had protected him, that had enabled him, and worse, one that extended far beyond him. Shaq sat in his office, his massive hands resting on a stack of confidential files. Across from him, Samantha Reed, the PR head, and Henry Wallace, the HR director, sat in tense silence. Lisa Thompson, the whistleblower, had just left, but her words still echoed in the room. Every time we flagged a complaint against Donovan, it disappeared at the board level. Shaq tapped a finger against the table, his jaw tight. If complaints against Donovan were getting shut down, it means someone on the board wanted him there, he said. The question is why? Henry hesitated, then slid another folder across the desk. We found something, he said. This isn't just about Donovan's behavior, it's about policy. Shaq flipped open the folder. The first document was a memo from a senior executive, dated 3 years ago. Effective immediately, first-class seating will be prioritized for high-value clientele. Additional security screenings may be required for travelers flagged under discretionary review. The language was corporate sanitized, but Shaq understood exactly what he was looking at. This isn't about priority seating, Shaq muttered. This is about who gets to fly in first class. Samantha exhaled sharply. It's racial profiling, Shaq. They just dressed it up in business terms. Shaq's grip on the paper tightened. So they were deliberately making it harder for certain people to access premium seats? Henry nodded. And guess who was one of the main enforcers of that policy? He flipped to another page. Donovan Kane's name was right there. A muscle ticked in Shaq's jaw. Donovan had been more than just a bad manager. He had been a willing pawn in a much bigger game. Shaq knew he couldn't take this lightly. This wasn't just about one airport. It was about an entire system of discrimination hidden under corporate policy. He had two options: stay silent, or burn the whole system down. Samantha was already watching him carefully. If we go public with this, she warned, the backlash will be huge, not just for the airport, for the entire airline industry. Shaq's voice was firm. Then we do it right. Henry frowned. What do you mean? Shaq leaned forward. We gather undeniable proof. We get whistleblowers, leaked emails, surveillance footage. We make sure that when this story breaks, no one can sweep it under the rug. Samantha's lips curled into a slow nod. You're talking about a full-scale takedown. Shaq met her gaze. I'm talking about changing the game. Shaquille O'Neal had spent his career playing against some of the smartest, most strategic minds in basketball. He knew how to read a play before it happened, how to anticipate moves before they unfolded. And now he was bringing that same mindset to the game of corporate warfare. This wasn't just about Donovan Kane anymore. This was about the system that protected him. And Shaq wasn't just going to expose it. He was going to make them bury themselves. The plan started with information. Shaq, Samantha Reed, and Henry Wallace spent nights combing through records, emails, and internal memos. Every suspicious policy, every rerouted complaint, every pattern of discrimination hidden behind technical jargon. Then came the whistleblowers. Lisa Thompson wasn't the only employee who had seen the truth. More staff, past and present, started coming forward. Some anonymously, others, emboldened by Shaq's leadership, willing to put their names on the record. But even with all of that, Shaq knew it wasn't enough. They needed something undeniable. Which is why, over the next week, Shaq turned the entire airport into his playing field. Hidden cameras were discreetly placed in key locations, inside executive conference rooms, near employee break areas, even at security checkpoints. It wasn't illegal. This was his airport now, and as CEO he had the authority to monitor operations. And then, they waited. Meanwhile, Donovan Kane was unraveling. The moment he had signed his resignation, he thought he was free, thought he had escaped with his reputation barely intact. But now, he saw the writing on the wall. Employees no longer avoided him in the hallways. They openly whispered when he passed. Security guards, once quick to nod in respect, barely looked in his direction. The tension in the air was thick with anticipation. Something was coming, and Donovan knew he was at the center of it. Then, just when Donovan thought it couldn't get worse, the board made their move. Shaq sat in his office when the call came through. Shaquille, the voice on the other end, was controlled, measured, a senior board member. Someone with power, someone with a lot to lose. "We need to talk." Shaq leaned back in his chair. "About what?" A pause. Then, "Let it go, big guy." Shaq's fingers tapped against the desk. There it was, the pressure. They wanted him to walk away, to turn a blind eye, to pretend that none of this had ever happened. Shaq chuckled, his voice low. "You think I'm just gonna drop this? You don't understand how deep this goes," the voice warned. "You push too hard, and you won't just take down a few people, you'll bring the whole system down." Shaq's jaw clenched. "That's exactly what I'm trying to do." He took a slow breath and smiled to himself. "Good," he said. "Then I guess we're on the right track." The line went dead. Shaq leaned forward, exhaled, and whispered under his breath, "Checkmate." The morning started with an uneasy stillness, the kind that comes before a storm. Shaquille O'Neal sat at his desk, scanning the latest reports from his team. The evidence against the airport board was airtight, too airtight. He knew what was coming next. Desperation. When corrupt systems are exposed, they don't just collapse, they fight back. And sure enough, the first strike landed before noon. The first red flag was a news alert. Samantha Reed, head of PR, stormed into Shaq's office, her phone clenched in her fist. She didn't even knock. "You need to see this," she said, sliding the phone onto his desk. Shaq leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he read the headline. Breaking. Shaquille O'Neal abusing power as airport CEO? Insiders claim chaotic leadership. Shaq exhaled slowly. "And here we go." Samantha shook her head, scrolling further. "It's not just one article, it's everywhere. They're calling you unqualified, accusing you of making reckless changes, even suggesting you're intimidating staff with your presence." Shaq chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Let me guess. No sources named?" Samantha nodded grimly. "Anonymous inside sources." Shaq leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. Someone inside the airport had leaked this. And not just anyone. Someone high up. "We have a mole," he muttered. The second strike came an hour later. Henry Wallace, head of HR, barged into the office without his usual calm demeanor. His face was tight with frustration, a folder clutched in his hands. "They just blocked our internal audit," he said without preamble. Shaq frowned. "Who did?" "The board," Henry spat. "They called for an independent review, which means they're burying it. If they control the investigation, they control the outcome." Shaq's jaw tensed. They were covering their tracks. He took the folder from Henry and flipped it open. The evidence was all there. Racial profiling policies, whistleblower statements, a trail of corruption leading straight to the top. And now, the board was trying to erase it. "They're moving fast," Henry muttered. "They know we have them cornered, and they're scrambling to keep this quiet." Shaq's grip tightened on the folder. "Then we move faster." The final blow came that evening. A formal notice arrived at Shaq's office, a request for an emergency board meeting. The message was clear. They were trying to force him out. The board wasn't going down without a fight. They were using the oldest trick in the book, character assassination. If they couldn't stop Shaq with facts, they'd drown him in lies. Shaq exhaled, placing the notice on his desk. This wasn't just about an airport anymore. This was a battle against a corrupt system. And if they thought he was backing down, they didn't know who they were dealing with. Shaquille O'Neal had always known the game was rigged. He had seen it in sports, in business, and now in the cold, calculating corridors of corporate power. But he never expected the knife to come from someone inside his own team. The smear campaign against him had escalated overnight. First whispers in the press, then full-blown headlines painting him as a reckless CEO, a man too big, too inexperienced to run an airport.
But what hit the hardest?
The anonymous leaks. Because they weren't just coming from the board. They were coming from someone close. It was Samantha Reed who first saw it. She burst into Shaq's office, eyes burning with frustration. Her phone clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Without a word, she tossed it onto his desk. Shaq glanced at the screen. A leaked internal memo, stamped with the airport's official seal. But the content? It was a complete fabrication. O'Neal's reckless policies endanger airport stability. Sources say. Internal concerns mount over CEO's erratic decision-making. Employees fear sudden, baseless firings under new leadership. Shaq frowned. Who the hell wrote this? Samantha exhaled sharply. That's the problem. It's coming from inside. Someone in senior leadership is feeding this garbage to the media. Shaq's stomach twisted. This wasn't just an attack. This was betrayal. Henry Wallace stormed in next, looking equally rattled. He slammed a folder onto the desk, flipping it open. We traced the leaks back to one of our own executives. Someone you trusted. Shaq's gaze hardened. Who? Henry hesitated before saying the name. Mark Ellison, the vice president of operations. Shaq felt his entire body go still. Mark had been one of the first people to support his leadership. He had sat across from Shaq in meeting after meeting, nodding in agreement, acting like a loyal second in command. And all the while, he had been feeding the board ammunition to take Shaq down. That evening, Shaq sat alone in his office, staring at the city skyline. The weight of the decision pressed on him. He had two choices: fight back harder, or let the system win. If he retaliated, he would need to go all in, publicly expose the corruption, name names, and risk an all-out war with corporate giants who had resources beyond imagination. But if he backed down, he would be just another casualty in a rigged game. He closed his eyes, exhaled, and made his decision. The game wasn't over. It was just getting started. The storm had been building for weeks, and now it was about to break. Shaquille O'Neal sat at his desk, staring at the stack of undeniable evidence in front of him. Internal memos, whistleblower testimonies, security footage, proof that the corruption at the airport wasn't just real but systemic. For too long, the board had controlled the narrative. They had leaked false information, planted stories in the press, and tried to turn public opinion against him. But now, Shaq was about to flip the board entirely. And he was going to do it live. The press conference was set for noon. By the time the clock struck 11:45, the media room at the airport was packed with reporters, cameras, and industry insiders. The tension was thick, the air buzzing with speculation. Was Shaq about to resign? Was he going to fold under the pressure? The board members had front row seats, their expressions carefully neutral. They thought they had him trapped. They thought he had no way out. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. At exactly 12 p.m., Shaq stepped onto the stage. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit or corporate attire. He didn't need to. He was all business. He took his place at the podium, adjusted the mic, and let the room settle into silence. Then, with a calm, steady voice, he spoke. "I've been in the public eye my whole life," he began. "I know how the game works. People in power don't like being challenged. They don't like when someone holds up a mirror and shows them what they really are." The cameras zoomed in. Every station was broadcasting this live. "But I didn't come here to play their game," Shaq continued. "I came here to change it." He reached down and picked up a thick folder, holding it up for everyone to see. "This," he said, "is the truth." He laid it flat on the podium and flipped it open. And then he started reading. Emails from high-ranking board members discussing racial profiling policies. Internal memos confirming that certain travelers were deliberately blocked from first-class seating. Records of whistleblower complaints that were buried and ignored. Every page, a new revelation. The room was dead silent. The board members shifted in their seats, their faces pale. They had expected damage control. They hadn't expected this. Then Shaq delivered the final blow. He pressed a button on the laptop in front of him, and a pre-recorded video played on the big screen. A hidden camera recording from inside a boardroom. The voice of Mark Ellison, the same executive who betrayed Shaq, laughing with his colleagues. Shaq's just a face. A brand. He won't last 6 months. We'll have him out before he even realizes what hit him. Shaq turned back to the audience, letting the words sink in. Then he leaned into the mic. The corruption ends today. Within minutes, the impact was earth-shattering. The FBI announced an official investigation. Donovan Kane was taken into custody for fraud and discrimination violations. The entire airport board resigned within 20. And Shaq? He didn't just survive. He won. Checkmate.
The airport was different now.
The air felt lighter. The tension that once weighed down employees and passengers alike had lifted. The fear of unchecked authority, the quiet resentment toward those who held power and abused it. It was all gone. Because Shaquille O'Neal had changed the game. In the weeks following the scandal, the entire structure of airport leadership was overhauled. Policies were rewritten from the ground up. The discriminatory first-class seating restrictions were eliminated, and a new oversight committee was formed to ensure no passenger was ever denied based on race, background, or financial status again. Shaq made sure the whistleblowers who risked their careers to expose the truth were protected and rewarded. Promotions were given to those who had stood on the right side of history, and those who had covered up corruption, they were gone. This wasn't just about an airport anymore. It was a movement. One afternoon, Shaq stood at the terminal, watching passengers move through security. He saw something different now, a sense of fairness, of dignity. People were being treated as equals. This was what he fought for. But as he turned to leave, his eyes caught something unexpected. A familiar face. Donovan Kane. He wasn't in a suit anymore. No expensive tie. No airport badge hanging from his pocket. Instead, he was pushing a cart filled with luggage, wearing the uniform of a low-level baggage handler, at a small regional terminal. Shaq didn't feel satisfaction. No gloating. No smugness. Just a quiet realization. Some lessons come too late. As he walked past, Donovan finally looked up, meeting Shaq's gaze. There was no hatred in his eyes, no arrogance, just exhaustion. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Shaq did something Donovan never expected. He stopped. "You can still change," Shaq said simply. "But you gotta want it." Donovan swallowed hard. He gave the smallest nod. Shaq didn't wait for a response. He just walked away, stepping into the world he had helped rebuild. And just like that, the story ended. Power unchecked is power abused. This isn't just a story, it's a reminder that leadership isn't about control. It's about accountability. The systems we trust should serve everyone, not just the privileged few. The question is, when the moment comes, will you stand up or step back? Because change doesn't start at the top. It starts with us.